welcome back to another video. I'm super excited about today's video because we are going to be doing a little bit
of a recommendation.
If you follow me on Instagram, then you'll probably have already seen some recommendation series that I've been doing, and I thought it'd be a really great idea to bring that over to YouTube and give you guys some recommendations for authors of color.
I'm so excited.
So the first book on my list is A Match Made in Mahindi, which follows our main character Simran, who comes from a long line of Indian matchmakers. Simran is an artist and she doesn't want anything to do with matchmaking or with her family's legacy. She wants to be her own person and pursue her own dreams and create things that are just for herself and that represent herself separate from her culture. But it isn't until Simran and her best friend decide that they want to elevate their status in their high school that they decide to develop a matchmaking app. And oh my goodness, this book is absolutely amazing. It was so wonderful seeing Indian representation in the YA contemporary space because I feel like I learned so much about matchmaking. I did definitely think it was just, like you get two people together and then you're like, oh, they're cute, they work together, perfect. But this book really delves into the history of matchmaking, the cultural importance of matchmaking, and specifically in Simran's family, what that means for them. They had this book, I can't remember what it was called, that kind of just cataloged everything from her family like throughout the decades and throughout all the years, and I just thought that was just really wonderful because it was kind of like a little piece of her family's legacy, and seeing the importance of that book in her family and the importance of that book in her family's legacy was just so amazing. The amount of times I'm saying legacy for this book is just take a shot every time I say legacy. But the book was phenomenal. I thought that the relationships between Simran and her family and her friends, I think there was also a romance in this book. Everything was just so flawless. I honestly can't think of a single thing I didn't like about this book because it was just so good and so sweet. If you love YA contemporary books, you're going to absolutely adore this. Every time I think about this book, I just feel so happy. It's definitely one that I would reread because it was just so... The next book on my list is The Poet X, and this is definitely not going to surprise anyone because Elizabeth Acevedo is one of my favorite authors. I talk about her all the time. She's amazing. She has a way with words.
We write to remind ourselves we are still here and that we can still heal.
That will shock you, that will make you cry, that will make you scream, that will make you question your life, and that's definitely what this book will do. This was the very first book that I read by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I have now read all of her books, and it is still my absolute favorite. This book follows our main character, Xiomara, who is a poet, and she uses her poetry to, of course, express her emotions, express her pain, her confusion, her anger, her love, different things about her life, and she is, outside of poetry, not allowed to do those things because she comes from a very devout Catholic household that kind of looks down on a lot of the things that Xiomara wants to experience and wants to explore, such as her body, romance, things of those natures. It was really interesting to read such a dynamic in her family and to just kind of see the experiences that Xiomara had with her mother. They have a very difficult relationship. While it wasn't nice to see a character struggle with their family like that, it was, I think, something that a lot of people would relate to. I was crying a lot while reading that book. It was just such a phenomenal book, and I know it's a really popular book as well, but I still think if you have not read it, this is definitely one you should check out. I recommend you listen to it as an audiobook because Elizabeth Acevedo narrates it and she's just phenomenal. Like, this woman is amazing.
Period. That's it.
Next, we have Know My Name, which is a nonfiction novel by Chanel Miller, who was Emily Doe, who is the victim of the Stanford case. And this book, as you can imagine, was extremely difficult to get through because of the topic. I had to take several pauses while reading this book. I do think it's an important book, and it's honestly probably my favorite. It's in my top 5 of the entire year, maybe top 5 ever. Chanel Miller has such a wonderful way of writing and such a wonderful skill when it comes to making you feel her pain, because this is just something extremely horrifying to ever imagine happening to someone, and seeing the way it affected Chanel when it happened to her, and then over the years, and how that affected her relationships, how she saw herself, her future, her family. It was just such a painful thing to see or to hear about happening to someone. And I remember the case when all of this was going down, and I remember being like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine what this person is going through, only to find out that this person then wrote a book, published it, and is now, still trying to pick up her life. Just read the book because it's amazing. It's so emotional. Like, I have never felt so angry and so just angry at the world that I did when I was reading this book. And also, I did recently start listening to Chanel's podcast with her sister, Tiffany, and it is just so nice to know that after she went through all those things, she can still, get on a podcast with her sister and talk about her childhood and laugh and just be in a space of joy for even a short time. She definitely is such an amazing person. She's an amazing artist, and I cannot wait to see what else she writes. This is definitely one to check out if you love nonfiction, because it is going to blow you out of the park. I don't think I'm ever going to be this impressed by a nonfiction book ever again, which is sad to say because I read this so early in my nonfiction journey, but we'll see what happens. The next book on my list is The Vanishing Half, which is a story that follows two sisters who are white passing but black, and how their stories kind of diverge into two. The one sister decides that she is going to go off and be a white person, and the other sister embraces her blackness. I really, really enjoyed this book because it really talks very heavily and very deeply about how society views black people and how what we see as whiteness could really not be, because the one sister struggles so hard to prove to white people that she's white while also trying to hide away from black people. She does so many chaotic and kind of like very, very questionable and scary things throughout the story to prove that she's not a black person. And it was very interesting to read, especially because both sisters end up having children of their own, where we have the one sister who married a black man having a child that completely embraces her blackness and is trying to love herself the way she is, even though she has been ostracized for being a dark-skinned black woman. And then we have the other daughter who grew up in the household where she thought she was white because her father's white, her mom's white. She ends up doing a lot of really racist things. And it was just very interesting to see how people behave when they think or when they're trying to uphold a certain racial standard for themselves. I really loved the discussions in this book because we get to learn a lot about what happened to these sisters, the way that they kind of like separated in their views and in their thoughts and how they process things because of some of the trauma that they experienced. And I just really, really love this book. It is definitely not going to give you a clean ending, like an ending that's going to answer all your questions. And I just found that to be very, very realistic, because life is never going to just be perfect and wrapped up in a bow and everybody finding out the truth about everything. So if you're somebody who really, really loves things being wrapped up in a bow and you're like, I want it to be perfect, still read it. But if you're somebody who's like, I'm fine with the unknowns, then you will really love this book. So the next book on my list is There's Something About Sweetie, which follows our main characters Ashish and Sweetie. If you have read When Dimple Met Rishi, this is Rishi's younger brother Ashish and his love story. In this book, Ashish is freshly dumped by his girlfriend and he is heartbroken and tattered and in pieces, and his parents decide to matchmake him with a girl in order to kind of like prove to him that they know what they're doing, especially because they already succeeded with his older brother. On the flip side, we have Sweetie, who is an athlete. She's fat. She's proud of that. She is proud of her body and she's proud of her existence as an athlete, but she is constantly undermined by people around her, by aunties and her mom, and other people just constantly look down on Sweetie because of her weight and are always telling her, how are you going to ever get a boyfriend if you're fat? How are you ever going to get a boyfriend if you're always eating sweets and always eating all these foods? And so Sweetie is kind of like apprehensive to being match made because she doesn't want to be essentially fat shamed by any guy that she's trying to date. But her mom also convinces her to kind of like do the matchmaking thing, and Ashish and Sweetie enter this contract thing where they're trying to prove to their parents that they're not gonna fall in love, and they're trying to prove that this is not gonna work. But of course, because it's a romance, it works, and that's all I'm gonna say. This book was so good. It was really wonderful seeing a main character who is fat and an athlete embracing both parts of herself and being proud of it. It was just like two teenagers meeting, falling in love, all the things that happen. It was just really, really great. So if you are looking for something with fat rep or looking for something that's just really, really cute, Ashish's character is just so sweet and so wholesome. So yeah. The next book on my list is Check Please, which follows our main character who is a hockey player, a baker, and a YouTuber. Those are three things I definitely did not expect in a character, especially a main character, like one character. And when I say that this is just flawlessly done, I really mean it. Before reading this graphic novel, I definitely did not care about hockey at all. I was like, okay, this kind of like boring sport, but I'll just read it, because at the time I was really like binging graphic novels and mangas. So I was like, you know what, I'll just read it. But oh my goodness, I was pleasantly surprised. This series is just so wonderful because you get to see our main character, who you wouldn't really expect to be in a hockey team or really expect to be in the situations that he is in throughout the book and making friends with people he makes friends with. It's just really wonderful to see that, and I really, really liked the friendships. I really liked the dynamics of the friendships and how our main character kind of started out being the character where people were like, we kind of don't like him. He's kind of weird. Like, why is he baking all these pies? To him being like a really core member of the group and of the team. And also the romance in this is just really sweet and wholesome. If you are a content creator, you're gonna really love this, because our main character does struggle throughout the series with balancing school and hockey games with his YouTube channel. Like, a lot of times he's like, oh my gosh, sorry, I haven't uploaded in like 2 months. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry about that. And it was like so relatable. So yeah, it was really great. And the author is Nigerian, so we stan. But yeah, check it out. It's amazing. So the next book on my list is The Henna Artist, which is a book that I have not been able to shut up about ever since finishing it. And it is with good reason, because this book is absolutely flawless. It has not left my mind since I read it, and I don't think it will ever leave my mind. And so now I want to pass that baton along so it can also not leave your mind, because wow. So this book follows our main character Lakshmi, who at the age of 17, she escapes an abusive relationship and moves to Jaipur. The book is set in the 1950s. Lakshmi moves to Jaipur to become a henna artist, as well as kind of like a matchmaker for these rich families. And we fast forward to the future where she is an adult, and she one day, like at her doorstep, a sister she didn't know existed shows up with her ex-husband. And she's like, who are you? And why are you here with this man who I literally ran away from because he is the worst person ever? And she ends up having to take custody of a 13-year-old sister that I mentioned she didn't know existed. And like, can you imagine being an adult and you're trying to juggle being, you know, a matchmaker, being a henna artist, trying to juggle running away from your past that just haunts you every day, and then here at your doorstep comes this young girl that you're now having to take care of because both of her parents are dead. So the younger sister also ran away from the small town because I think she found a letter or something about her sister. Like, she knew her older sister existed, but her older sister did not know that she existed. And that's all I'll say about that, because I feel like anything else would be a spoiler. But this book, the drama, the tea, the flavor in this book was just absolutely phenomenal. If you are a Bollywood fan, you're gonna eat this up. Even if you're not a Bollywood fan, if you're a fan of historical fiction, if you're a fan of tea, if you're a literary fiction fan, you need to read this. It is just so good. This is a debut novel, and I found that so hard to believe because of how well written this book was. And I know that Reese Witherspoon picked this for her book club, and all I'm gonna say is every Reese Witherspoon book that I've read this year has slapped. And I say that even though I've only read like 2 or 3, but it was just such a good book, and it was just so well done. Like, we got so many plot twists, so many turns, so many different hoops that we were running through the entire time I was reading this book. Like, there was not a single moment where I was bored. It's an awesome book. I highly recommend it to literally everyone. The moment I finished it, I was talking about it everywhere. I was tagging the author. I was being like, guys, you need to read this book. Please read this book. Please, I'm begging you, read this book, read this book, read this book. And that's all I'm gonna say. Read this book. How many times can I say read this book? I don't know. But read this book. Next is another book that is not going to surprise anyone, but I will kind of keep it brief because it's a very, very popular book regardless, but I still think it's one that people should read. And also, I want to just make a claim. I want to make my case. And the book that I'm talking about is The Sun is Also a Star. This book follows our main character, Natasha, who is a Jamaican immigrant who ends up finding out that she has one more day in the United States because her family is being deported because of something that happened that I won't say because it's a spoiler. And so she spends her last stay in New York City trying to find a lawyer to take her family's case and to keep them in the US and to make sure that they don't leave and she doesn't have to leave basically the only home that she has truly ever known. And on that day, she meets Daniel, who is a Korean American teenager who is on his way to an Ivy League interview for medical school or for like a medical track in university, and they cross paths.
When I see her, I forget about all that. Something about Natasha makes me think that fate has something much more extraordinary in store.
I really, really enjoyed reading this book. I read it before I had joined, or right when I had joined BookTube, and it was just such a life-changing read. Like, I cried. Like, the book is literally YA contemporary. Like, it's cute. It's YA contemporary romance. It has the one-day trope, which I really, really love. Like, the 24-hour trope, like, whatever, that's, like, my favorite. This book just made me cry so much because I just felt so seen. It's just such a great book, and I really also enjoyed and appreciated the discussion of how the Korean community and the Black community like kind of integrate and their relationships. One aspect of this book that I think is so unique and so wonderful is the fact that the author really goes into depth explaining how we got to certain realities we know now. Like, for example, I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of beauty hair supply stores are not owned by Black people, and so the author discusses why that is, how that history became, why every time you go to certain stores you don't see certain people working there or owning such stores. And I just really, really loved that discussion. Of course, the book is very cheesy and very like tropey.
Daniel is a hopeless romantic. He's a dreamer. He's a poet.
I know this is real.
Daniel, it can't be real because my family's being deported tomorrow.
But it is an important one still, and I will still recommend it because I feel like it does so much. Like, till this day, I have not read anything that made me feel so represented. If you read it, please don't drag me. That's all I want to say. Don't drag me. Don't drag me. Just read it, give it the rating you want to give it, and move on. Also, if you are somebody who enjoyed The Sun Is Also a Star, please comment down below and tell me why you liked it, because I'm tired of feeling alone in loving this book. I need some allies. So the next book on my list is A Silent Voice, which is a pretty popular manga series, but I still think it's a really important one to read, and I wanted to add it to my list because this series follows our main character Shoya, who was a bully when he was in elementary school, and he severely, when I say severely, I really mean that. This series does not sugarcoat any of that. He severely bullied a deaf student, Shoko, and he basically made her life hell. Anything he could do to make her suffer, he did. But years later in the future, he is basically like an outcast because of some things that happen that I won't say because they're spoilers. And the reason why I really adore this series, even though it's extremely depressing and extremely painful to read, is because it's extremely depressing and extremely painful to read. If you are somebody who has ever been bullied or ever gone through these things, it is definitely something that's going to make you feel seen and feel comforted, and that's how I felt from it. I will say that there are a lot of triggers, but yeah, it was definitely a very good read for me because I just felt seen, and I feel like it's a very important one to read because it shows how people can change and how the things people experience can really form who they are. And it was really nice to read a series that talked about that and that kind of had a character that acknowledged and took accountability for all the things that he did to this girl who was innocent and did nothing to him. He went through so much pain because of the pain he caused someone. I was like, karma, but also like, please get better, both of you. Yeah, I don't know if there are any more series like this that do discuss things like this that are manga series, but if you know of any, please leave some suggestions down below because I really am trying to get more into manga, but I'm kind of like having a little bit of trouble about where to start. Alright, so we have come to the last book on my list, and that is American Panda. I do not hear enough people talking about this book, okay? And I need more people to talk about this book. Maybe I'm just not seeing the right people talk about the book, or maybe I'm not in the right spaces for people talking about the book, but I just don't see, and I need more people to talk about this book because this book is phenomenal. It follows our main character who is a student at MIT, and she comes from a very, very traditional Taiwanese household where her parents expect her to become a doctor. The only problem with this is that she hates anything medical related. She's always falling asleep at lectures and she cannot imagine being a doctor. Like, she just doesn't want to do that with her life. And on top of that, her parents also do not want her to be with anybody who is not Taiwanese because of course they want somebody who is going to share their culture, going to share their language, and naturally, this also is another problem because May has a crush on a student who is not Taiwanese. I think he was Japanese, and that causes a lot of issues because we learn in the story that there is something that happened in her family that also makes this a very, very sensitive point for her parents. But yeah, what did I love about this book? Pretty much everything. I really, really liked the discussion on coming from a very traditional household that expects you to kind of have a specific type of trajectory with your education and with your career and also with your relationships. If you come from like an immigrant family or a very cultural family or anything like that, you are expected to date certain types of people from your culture or close to your culture, things like that. And it was just really wonderful reading a book that talked about such things so heavily. And the relationships in this book, the family dynamic, is definitely one that is extremely strained. So if you are somebody who likes reading about difficult family situations, family wars, things like that, I think you'll really, really love this book. I really loved this book because I thought it was well written. I really liked seeing our main character discover who she was and struggle with the things that happened in her family in the past, and we're kind of like crafting her own story out of that. It was really great to see the romance aspect, the awkwardness. It was also, I feel like, a very great addition to see our main character in the space that she didn't want to be in. For example, like wanting to be a doctor. I think she like had an internship or a shadowing or something that she had to do, and it was just really like relatable to see her and like to feel her emotions of hatred for that position. And it's kind of like, oh, I've been there, like I know what that feels like. And I felt like the entire time I was reading this, I was like, oh, you're gonna be fine. Like when you tell them you're gonna be fine, like it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be fine. Was it? We'll find out. Read it and you'll find out because I don't want to spoil. But another thing too I would like to mention with the story is going to it thinking very realistically about what will happen. The book is not one to read for any idealistic, like, oh my gosh, I hope it ends well and beautifully, and I hope everything's tied up in a knot and in a beautiful bow. You might get your feelings hurt. But yeah, that's it. Those are all the books I have for right now that I would really, really, really love to recommend to you guys by authors of color. These books are just wonderful, amazing. I think about them very, very often. But yes, those are all the books. If you watched this entire video, leave me a purple heart, partly because purple hair and partly because I want to see how many people got to the end because I feel like this is a very, very long video. But yes, leave me a purple heart if you have watched the entirety of this video. Have a wonderful day. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!